Hello there, people of the internet. How is everybody doing today? I'm doing alright, thanks for asking. I was talking with a viewer of the channel, and he was on Patreon, and he actually reminded me about this idea. I'd completely forgotten about it. But the idea is that this particular viewer of the channel lives up in Alaska, and he was wondering what I would bring if I were to go moose hunting up there. I really like the idea of going moose hunting in Alaska. Not entirely sure if I'll be able to pull it off, especially with my extremely limited resources right now, but who knows what the future will have in store for me. But the issue with moose hunting in Alaska is the firearms that I would pick, I pretty much don't have. Here in the state of Florida, we definitely don't have things that get nearly as big as the moose in Alaska, so I really don't need all that powerful of a firearm to go take out a moose. But in the hypothetical situation that I were to decide to myself, you know what time is it? 4 in the afternoon, I'm going to go to Alaska and go on a moose hunt. What would I bring if I were to just decide to myself to go ahead and do that? There's a lot of considerations whenever it comes to picking what it is that you're going to bring on your hunting trip, and a lot of it has to do with not only what it is that you're hunting, but the ammunition that is available for said firearm. Not only that, but like the environment you're going to be hunting in and what to expect, etc., etc. Out of the things that I have, there's a couple of different options. One option that I would probably bring, this is probably going to be the most likely thing that I would bring in this particular situation. I have an M1 Garand, actually I got a couple of M1 Garands chambered in 30-06. I would probably bring an M1 Garand in 30-06, and I would use an updated gas system inside that thing because I would be using commercial ammunition. I would also be using 220 grain projectiles. Before you go freaking out in the comments down below, trying to tell me that you don't use heavy grain projectiles in M1 Garand, I got to explain something to you guys. In M1 Garand, the issue with the M1 Garand is high pressures bending the operating rod. Well, the high pressures in a gas chamber has nothing to do with the weight of the projectile that you are firing. The high pressures in a gas chamber are from gas pressure of that cartridge. The issue with heavier projectiles is that that heavier projectile is going to move slower down the barrel, and so as a result, you're actually going to get a higher spike in pressure because that projectile has not left the barrel to help alleviate that gas pressure, and as a result, you're going to end up getting higher pressures than you normally would. However, with commercial ammo, with these heavier projectiles, they have to adhere by a certain pressure specification. It's a SAMI specification, and every cartridge has to adhere by it if you're going to be selling it on the commercial market. Otherwise, you have to label it as like plus P or plus P plus or a Magnum round or something like that. You have to have a certain amount of gas pressure. So to compensate for that heavier bullet, different powders and different volumes of powder are used to achieve that same pressure level with the M1 Garand. So the heavier bullet is not going to affect anything as long as you have the appropriate pressures inside of your gas system. That being said, I would bring an updated gas system so I could adjust it accordingly. But I would probably bring the M1 Garand in 30-06, use commercial ammo, updated gas system. And the reason why I would do that is because the M1 Garand is a self-loading firearm. 30-06, it's powerful. 220 grain projectiles are definitely potent, don't get me wrong. But in the event that I find myself capable of taking more than one shot at this moose before it decides to dip and run, that's probably what I would do. I would try to lay more than one shot down on target and drop that moose as soon as possible. I've never gone moose hunting before. I have no idea how effective 30-06 would actually be on said moose, but I have seen people with my own eyes take out rhino and elephant with 30-06, so I imagine that it would be just fine. That being said, the actual cartridge itself matters significantly less than the bullet it is that you're going to be using. For example, a moose, that's very large, thick bone, very tough hide. There's a lot of things that you got to punch through in order to hit those vitals. And if you go using a soft lead core projectile that's designed to dump all of its energy immediately, it's like a deer hunting round or something like that, the odds of you dumping a bunch of energy onto the moose's vitals are quite low, especially if you have to punch through bone and whatnot. So I would likely use some sort of bonded projectile designed for a deep penetration on animals. And then, of course, you have to have the proper shot placement and all those other hunter's rules. With a scoped rifle, I would not really shoot beyond 400 yards. That's just my limitations as a shooter and as a hunter. So I would definitely have to limit myself to that 400-yard mark. That being said, that's well within the range of 30-06. So, all that being said, I don't really have any scoped rifles in 30-06, and I don't have anything that I would feel comfortable bringing out to shoot at that 400 yards that I have chambered in 30-06. So my M1 Garand has aperture sights on it. Aperture sights, me being blind, it's the easiest sight for me to use because that rear sight is right up on my face. Now we're talking specifically things that I own. So the M1 Garand, I would feel comfortable shooting that out like at maybe 300 yards. Probably not that 400 yard mark, but I could probably nail a large target at 300 yards with that M1 Garand, especially with those aperture sights. I don't know if I'd go out to that 300 yards. I guess I would play that by ear as to whether or not I would feel comfortable in that particular situation. But I do like the idea of having additional rounds in a semi-automatic 30-06 that I could send downrange. Now, that being said, the M1 Garand, yes, that would probably be my first pick, but at the same time, I do have another rifle that I would pick. And that would be this one right here. This is one I actually have for representation purposes. This is a Yugo 2447 Mauser, chambered in 8mm Mauser. Now, 8mm Mauser is by a huge margin a very powerful cartridge, but it's not nearly as powerful as some of the other rifles that are out there, or some of the other cartridges that are out there on the market, especially if we're talking modern day. The early versions of the 8mm Mauser came out right as smokeless powder was becoming a thing, and of course there were slight changes in bullet diameters and whatnot. We got a truck outside, fantastic. I guess I'll wait for that to pass. One of the perks about living in the city, I can't even remember what the hell I was talking about whenever it came to 8mm Mauser. Early versions of 8mm Mauser came out right as smokeless powder was becoming a thing, so of course bullet designs and cartridges that came about, a century later are going to be dramatically more efficient at sending these projectiles downrange. Now, that being said, Yugoslavian ammunition out of this Yugoslavian Mauser is of course on point. It sends a 198 grain projectile at about 2,600 or so feet per second, somewhere around that ballpark. And since that ammunition is designed specifically for this Mauser, it hits right at point of aim with these iron sights, like dead on with these iron sights. So this right here is an incredibly accurate Mauser with an incredibly accurate loading. I would probably get myself modern 200 grain projectiles and I would load them to fire at that 2,600 feet per second threshold. This way, out of this rifle, this particular rifle, I know that I'll be able to hit out at significantly long ranges because that is going to mimic the Yugoslavian surplus 8mm Mauser cartridge. So with that surplus 8mm Mauser cartridge, that 200 grain projectile at approximately 2,600 feet per second, I know that I'll be able to hit some pretty significant things at some pretty significant distances, especially if I'm using a modern-made bonded bullet that's designed for appropriate penetration. So, I'm a military surplus guy. A lot of the firearms I have are military surplus, so whenever it comes to me picking a firearm for something like this, of course you're going to get military surplus firearms because those are by a huge margin my most powerful firearms. For the most part, as far as modern day firearms go, I got things chambered in 223 and 5.56. I got a bolt action in 270 and a bolt action in 308. That 308 one I would not consider to be a modern firearm though. But nothing in like a full power cartridge that could actually push these rounds the way that I need them to be pushed. I know a 308, that's still a pretty gosh darn potent round, and I'm not saying that it won't do the job, but I would want a full length, full power cartridge, like something like an 8mm Mauser. So, if I were to pick something that I don't actually have, these are the things that I would pick that I actually have. If I were to pick something that I don't actually have, and I could just, decide to myself, you know what, moose hunt, I'm going to go buy a new rifle specifically for this moose hunt, I would get a 300 Win Mag, and there's probably going to be the best option. I can't remember what the velocities are. I've got them written down in this magical book of mine. Yeah, 300 Win Mag. It's going to send a 180 grain projectile about 3,200 feet per second. So a 200 grain projectile about 3,000 feet per second. That's 4,100 foot-pounds of energy on target. That is absolutely adequate enough to be able to take out that moose, especially if I'm using a proper bullet that will penetrate well. This right here is just a soft point, and I would not bring this soft point to that moose hunt. As a little, what would you call it, comparison? Here is our 300 Win Mag, and here's a 30-06. 30-06 looks skinny and anemic compared to that 300 Win Mag, I gotta say. Now that I line them up side by side, the 30-06 does not seem so bad, and the 300 Win Mag, it kind of scares me. So out of the things I have, first choice, M1 Garand, 30-06, 220 grain projectiles, and an updated gas system so I don't have to worry about bending the operating rod in my M1 Garand. So that would be my first choice. Next pick, definitely a close second, would probably be this particular Yugoslavian Mauser, only because I know how to load for this one extremely well, and I know that this particular rifle is also extremely accurate. Now, out in Alaska, you're probably going to be shooting at long distances, so if I were to go on a moose hunt in Alaska, I would probably just bite the bullet and spend a few $100s on a 300 Win Mag and get myself a scope for it so I can actually make shots out to appropriate distances because, well, I'm used to here in Florida and we got, like, jungles and whatnot. Longest hunting range here is like 100 yards unless you're on a piece of flat land or something like that, and those are not very common for hunting here in Florida. So yeah, 300 Win Mag. If I'm going to go on a moose hunting, I'd get myself a modern rifle and get myself a scope and do all the hunting things with that. So those are my options. That's what I would pick. Thanks for watching, folks. I appreciate your time. Like, subscribe, share. Description below is a link to all sorts of stuff. Go check it out. You guys go off, have yourself a fantastic day. I will see you.
Since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. The poor man's Garand. Shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.